Hey, so it's Anna of Tanya, and Anna's reading of Terry Pratchett's The Night Watch. You can tell that I haven't had any meetings yet today. I still look like this. So let's begin. Swordfish. Every password was swordfish. Whenever anyone tried to think of a word that no one would ever guess, they always chose swordfish. It was just one of the strange quirks of the human mind. That explained the guilt anyway. A plot. Another damn plot in a city full of plots. Did he need to know about plots? Anyway, he knew about this one. Morphic Street. The famous Morphic Street conspiracy. Huh. He pushed the greasy scrap into a pocket and then hesitated. Someone was being quiet. Overlaid on the distant street noise was a sort of hollow in the sounds, filled by careful breathing, and the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. Quietly, he pulled the blackjack out of his rear pocket. Now, what were the options? He was a copper, and someone was creeping up on him. If they weren't a copper, then they were in the wrong, because he was a copper. And if they were a copper too, then they were one of Swing's crew, and therefore in the wrong, because he was a better copper than them, and so were things floating in gutters, and therefore delivering a swift bucketful of darkness had no obvious downside. On the other hand, thieves, assassins, and Swing's men, by all accounts, did a lot of creeping up on people and were probably pretty good at it, whereas the person tracking him was keeping their back so close to the wall he could hear the scraping. That meant they were probably just a member of the public with something on their mind, and he was not inclined to add several ounces of lead shot simply for that reason, because he'd like to believe he wasn't that sort of copper. He settled for stepping out into the alley and saying, "Yeah?" A boy stared up at him. It had to be a boy. Nature would not have been so cruel as to do that to a girl. No single feature in itself was more than passably ugly, but the combination was greater than the sum of the parts. There was also the smell. It wasn't bad as such. It just wasn't entirely human. There was something feral about it. Said its pinched-up face. "Look, tell you what, mister, you tell me where you're going and I'll stop following you. Have we got a deal? Cost you no more'n a penny, and that's a special price. Some people pay me a lot more than that to stop following them." Vimes continued to stare. The creature was wearing an oversized evening dress jacket, shiny with grease and greenish with age, and a top hat that must have once been trodden on by a horse. But the bits that were visible between the two were regrettably familiar. "Oh, no," he moaned. "No. No. You all right, mister?" No, oh, ye gods, it had to happen, didn't it? "You want I should go and fetch Mousy, mister?" Vimes pointed an accusing finger. "You're Nobby Nobbs, right?" The urchin backed away. "Could be. So what? Is that a crime?" He turned to run, but Vimes's hand fell heavily on his shoulder. "Some people might say so. You're Nobby Nobbs, son of Maisie Nobbs and Sconner Nobbs?" Probably, but I ain't done nothing, mister." Vimes bent down to look into the eyes that peered out of the world through a mask of grime. "How about whizzing wipers, snatching tinklers, pulling wobblers, flogging tumblers, and running rumbles?" Nobby's brow creased in genuine amazement. "What's pulling wobblers mean?" he said. Vimes gave him a similar look. Street parley had changed a lot in 30 years. "That's stealing trifles. Small items, isn't it?" No, mister, that's tottering Neville's," said Nobby, relaxing. "But you ain't doing badly for someone who's new. What's Oil of Angels?" Memory flicked a card. "A bribe," said Vimes. "And a timber," said Nobby, grinning. "Easy. Could be a head beggar, could just be a handsome man." "Well done. Bet you don't know how to fleeg a jade, though." Once again, from a dusty recess, a memory unrolled. This one stuck in your mind. "Dear me, do you know that? What a shame in one so young," said Vimes. "That's when you want to sell a broken-down horse and have to make it a bit frisky in front of the punters, and so you take some fresh, raw, hot ginger, lift up its tail, and push the ginger—" "Core," said Nobby, suddenly impressed. "Everyone says you're a real quick learner, and that's true enough. You could have been born here." "Why are you following me, Nobby Nobbs?" said Vimes. The urchin held out a grubby hand. Some street language never changes. Vimes pulled out a sixpence. It shone in Nobby's palm like a diamond in a chimney sweep's ear. "One of 'em's a lady," he said and grinned. The hand stayed out. "That was a bloody sixpence I just gave you, kid," Vimes growled. "Yeah, but I got to think of—" Vimes grabbed the lapels of Nobby's greasy coat and lifted him up, and was mildly shocked to realize that there was practically no weight there. Street urchin, he thought. Urchin sounds about right. Spiky, slimy, and smelling slightly of rotting seaweed. But there's hundreds of them around here, clawing a living off the very margins, and as I recall, Nobby was one of the sharpest. And as trustworthy as a chocolate hammer. But that's okay. There's ways to deal with that. How much, he said, for you to work for me all the time? I got customers to think of, he began. Yeah, but I'm the one holding you up in the air in one hand, right? Said Vimes. With his oversized boots dangling a foot above the ground, Nobby considered his position. All the time? Right. For something like that, I've got to be looking at a lordship every day. $1? Guess again. Half a dollar? Not a chance. $1 a week, and I won't make your life the utter misery which, Nobby, I assure you I can do in so many little ways. Still dangling, Nobby tried to work all this out. So, I'll be kind of like a copper, right? He said, grinning artfully. Kind of. Number one suspect says it's a good life being a copper because you can just pinch stuff without getting nicked. He's got that right, said Vimes. And he says if anyone gives you any lip, you can bop him one and chuck him in the tanty, Nobby went on. I'd like to be a copper one day. Who's number one suspect? That's what our man calls Sconner, our dad. Payment up front, yeah? Nobby added hopefully. What do you think? Right, no, eh? Correct. But I'll tell you what. He lowered Nobby to the ground. Light as a feather, he thought. You come with me, kid. Inkmore was full of men living in lodgings. Anyone with a spare room rented it out. And, in addition to the darning and stitching that was turning Miss Batty into one of the highest-earning seamstresses in the city, they needed something else that women were best able to supply. They needed feeding. There were plenty of hot chair eating places like the one Vimes headed for now. It sold plain food for plain men. There wasn't a menu. Sorry, one moment. Okay, where was I? Yes. There were plenty of hot chair eating places like the one Vimes headed for now. It sold plain food for plain men. There wasn't a menu. You ate what was put in front of you. You ate it quick, and you were glad to get it. If you didn't like it, there were plenty who did. The dishes had names like slum gullet, boiled eels, lobscouse, wet nellies, slumpy, and treacle billy. Good solid stuff that stuck to the ribs and made it hard to get up out of the seat. They generally had a lot of turnip in, even if they weren't supposed to. Vimes elbowed his way to the counter, dragging Nobby behind him. A chalked sign said, all you can eat in 10 minutes for 10p. Beneath it, a large woman was standing bare-armed by a cauldron in which uncertain things bubbled in grey scum. She gave him an appraising look and then glanced at his sleeve. What can I do for you, Sergeant? She said. What happened to Sergeant Knock? Comes in here a lot, does he? Said Vimes. Dinner and supper. Her look said it all. Second helpings, too, and he never pays. Vimes held up Nobby. See this? He said. Is it a monkey? Said the woman. Ha ha, very funny, moaned Nobby, as Vimes lowered him again. He's going to come in here for 1 square meal every day, said Vimes. All he can eat for 10 pence. Yes, and who's paying, may I ask? Me. Vimes plonked a $50 on the table. That's 5 days in advance. What's the special today? Slum gullet? It'll put hairs on your chest when you get a chest. Give him a big bowl. You might make a loss on this deal. He shoved Nobby onto a bench and placed the greasy bowl in front of him and sat down opposite. You said a lady, he said. Don't mess me about, Nobby. Have I got to share this, Sarge? Said Nobby, picking a wooden spoon. It's all yours. Make sure you eat up every bit. There may be a test later, Vimes said. A woman, you said. Lady Meserole, Sarge, said Nobby indistinctly through a mouthful of mixed vegetables and grease. Posh lady, everyone calls her Madam. Comes from Genoa a few months ago. When did she ask you? This morning, Sarge. What? She just stopped you in the street? I've got a kind of general contract with her, Sarge. Vimes glared. It was better than speaking. Nobby wriggled uneasily. Fact is, Sarge, she caught me nicking her Fact is, Sarge, she caught me snickering her nollie last month. Full spells, Sarge. She's got a punch on her like a mule. When I come round, we got to talking, and she said a keen young lad like me could be useful, as like an ear on the street. Vimes continued to glare, but he was impressed. Young Nobby had been a gifted pickpocket. Anyone who caught him in the act was quick indeed. He turned up the ferocity of the glare. All right, Sarge. She said she'd turn me over to the day watch if I didn't, Nobby confessed. You go straight to the tanty if a nob lays a complaint against you. That's bloody true, thought Vimes. Private law again. I don't want to go to the Tanty, Sarge. Schooner's in there. And he used to break your arms, Vimes remembered. So why's a fine lady interested in me, Nobby? He said aloud. Didn't ask. I told her about you and the hurry-up wagon and the unmentionables and everything. She said you sounded fascinating. And Rosie Palm's paying me a measly penny a day to keep an eye on you, too. Oh, and Corporal Snubs at Cable Street. He's paying me 1/2 penny to watch you, but what is a halfpenny these days, I say, so I don't watch you much on his account. Oh, and Lance Corporal Coates, I'm getting a penny from him, too. Why? I dunno. He asked me this morning, too. A penny job. Nobby belched hugely. Better out than in, eh? Who do you want me to watch for you, Sarge? Me, said Vimes, if you can fit it into your busy schedule. You want me to follow you? No, just tell me what people are saying about me. Keep an eye on who else is following me. Watch my back, sort of thing. Right. Just one more thing, Nobby. Yes, Sarge, said Nobby, still spooning. Give me back my notebook, my handkerchief, and the 4 pennies you whizzed from my pockets, will you? Nobby opened his mouth to protest, dribbling slum gullet, but closed it when he saw the glint in Vimes's eyes. Silently he produced the items from various horrible pockets. Well done, said Vimes, getting up. I'm sure I don't have to tell you again what'll happen to you if you try the old dippity-doo-dah on me again, do I, Nobby? No, Sarge, said Nobby, looking down. Want another bowl? Have fun. I've got to go back to work. You can rely on me, Sarge. Oddly enough, thought Vimes as he walked back to the watch house, I probably can. Nobby would nick anything and dodge anything, but he wasn't bad. You could trust him with your life, although you'd be daft to trust him with $1. He purchased a packet of Pantweed Slim Panatellas from another street trader. Carrying them around in their cardboard packet didn't feel right at all. There was a buzz in the main office as he strolled in. Watchmen were standing around in little groups. Sergeant Knox spotted Vimes and trotted over. I've got no idea if I've done Knock or his voice before, so everything will be terribly inconsistent. Bit of a do, sir. Had a break-in last night, he reported with a hint of a smirk. Really, said Vimes. What did they steal? Did I say they stole anything, sir? Said the sergeant innocently. Well, no, you didn't, said Vimes. That was me jumping to what we call a conclusion. Did they steal anything then, or did they break in to deliver a box of chocolates and a small complimentary basket of fruit? They stole the captain's silver inkstand, said Knock, impervious to sarcasm, and it was an inside job, if you want my opinion. The door upstairs was forced, but the main doors weren't. Must have been a copper what done it. Vimes was amazed at the forensic experience shown here. My word, a copper stealing, he said. Yes, it's a terrible thing, said Knock earnestly, especially since you showed us the way yesterday about being honest and everything. He glanced past Vimes and shouted, Attention! Officer present! Tilden was coming down the stairs. The room fell silent except for his hesitant steps. No luck, Sergeant, he said. Not so far, sir, said Knock. I was just telling Sergeant Keel what a terrible thing has happened. It was engraved, you know, said Tilden mournfully. Everyone in the regiment chipped in what they could afford. This really is very upsetting. A man would have to be a right bastard to steal something like that, eh, Sarge? Said Knock. Absolutely, said Vimes. I see you're pretty well organized on this one, Sergeant. Have you looked everywhere? Everywhere except the lockers, said Knock. There's not something we do lightly, rummaging through a man's locker. But we're all here now, and Captain Tilden's here to see if fair play. So although it's very distasteful, I'll ask you, Captain, for permission to rummage. Yes, if you must, said Tilden. I don't like the idea. It really is quite dishonorable, you know. Then I think, sir, to show us that we're doing this fairly, said Knock, us sergeants ought to be searched first. That way no one can say we didn't take it seriously. Come now, Sergeant, said Tilden with a little smile. I hardly think you are suspected. No, sir, fair's fair, said Knock. We'll set a good example, eh, Sergeant Keel? Vimes shrugged. Knock grinned at him and pulled out a bundle of keys and beckoned to Lance Corporal Coates. You do the honors, Ned, he said, beaming. Me first, of course. The door was unlocked. The contents of Knock's locker were the usual unsavory mess of lockers everywhere, but there was certainly no silver inkstand. If there were, it would have turned black after a single day. Well done. Now, Sergeant Keels, please, Ned. Knock's friendly beam fixed on Vimes as the policeman fumbled with the lock. Vimes stared back, face blank as a slate, as the door creaked open. Oh dear, what have we here? Said Knock, without even bothering to look. It's a sack, Sarge, said Coates. Something heavy in it, too. Oh, dear me, said Knox, still staring at Vimes. Open it up, lad, gently. We don't want anything to get damaged, eh? There was a rustle of Hessian, and then, It's half a brick, sir, Ned reported. What? A half brick, sir. I'm saving up for a house, said Vimes. There were one or two sniggers from the assembled men, but some of the faster thinkers were suddenly looking worried. They know, thought Vimes. Well, lads, welcome to Vimes's roulette. You spun the wheel, and now you've got to guess where the ball is going to go. Are you sure? Said Knock, turning to the open locker. It's just a sack, Sarge, said Ned, and a half brick. Is there a loose panel or something? Said Knock desperately. What, in a sack, Sarge? Well, that seems to be our locker, said Vimes, rubbing his hands together. Who's next, Sergeant Knock? Round and round the little ball goes, and where it stops, nobody knows. Personally, I think the captain's right. I don't think any of the men would, Knock began and faltered. Vimes's stare could have hammered rivets. I believe, Sergeant, that since we've begun this, it should be concluded, said Tilden. That is only fair. Vimes took a couple steps towards Coates and held out his hand. Keys, he said. Coates glared at him. The keys, Lance Corporal, said Vimes. He snatched them from Coates's hand and turned to the line of lockers. Right, he said. Let's start with the well-known arch-criminal, Lance Constable Vimes. Door after door was opened. The lockers, while possibly of interest to anyone studying the smells of unwashed clothing and the things that could grow in neglected socks, failed to produce a single silver inkstand. It did turn up the amorous adventures of Molly Clapper and Corporal Cullen's locker, however. Vimes stared at the crude and grubby engravings like a long-lost friend. He remembered that book. It had gone round the watch house for years, and as a young man he had learned a lot from some of the illustrations, although a good deal of what he had learned had turned out to be wrong. Fortunately, Captain Tilden's view was blocked, and Vimes shoved the greasy book back on a shelf and said to the red-eared Cullen, Studying theory, eh, Fred? Good man. Practice makes perfect. Then he turned at last to Coates's locker. The man watched him like a hawk. The scratch door creaked open. Every neck craned to see. There was a small stack of old notebooks, some civilian clothing, and a small sack of what, when it was tipped out onto the floor, turned out to be laundry. Surprised? Said the Lance Corporal. Not half as much as you are, Vimes thought. He winked at Coates and turned away. Can I have a word with you in your office, Sergeant? Yes, and can I have a word with you in your office, Captain? Yes, Sergeant, I suppose so, said Tilden, looking round. Oh, dear. Vimes gave the man some time to climb the stairs, then followed him into his office and tactfully closed the doors. Well, Sergeant, said Tilden, collapsing into his chair. Have you looked everywhere, sir? Said Vimes. Of course, ma'am. I mean, perhaps, sir, you put it in a desk drawer, or the safe, perhaps? Certainly not. I sometimes put it in the safe on weekends, but I'm sure I didn't do that last night. Vimes noted the subtle uncertainty. He was doing a bad thing, he knew. Tilden was nearly 70. At a time like that, a man learned to treat his memory only as a rough guide to events. I find, sir, that when a busy man has a lot on his plate, he can do things that subsequently slip his mind, he said. I know I do, he added to himself. I could put my house keys down on a bare room and not find them 30 seconds later. We've all been under a lot of pressure lately, he added, knowing that Tilden frequently fell asleep during the afternoon until Snowdy coughed very loudly outside the door before taking him his cocoa. Well, that's true, said Tilden, turning desperate eyes to him. All this curfew business, very unsettling. Forget my own head if it wasn't nailed on, what? He turned and looked at the green safe. Only had it a couple of months, he muttered. I suppose I... Look the other way, will you, Sergeant? May as well sort this out. Vimes obligingly turned his back. There was some clicking and a creak, and then an intake of breath. Tilden got to his feet, holding the silver inkstand. I believe I've made a fool of myself, Sergeant, he said. No, I've made a fool of you, thought Vimes, fervently wishing he hadn't. I'd intended to drop it into Coates's locker, but I couldn't. Not after what I found in there. Tell you what, sir, he volunteered. You could say it was a kind of test. I don't tell lies as a rule, Keel, said the captain, but added, I appreciate the suggestion nevertheless. Anyway, I know I'm not as young as I was. Perhaps it's time to retire. He sighed. I have to say I've been considering it for some time. Oh, don't talk like that, sir, said Vimes, far more jovially than he felt. I can't see you retiring. Yes, I suppose I should see things through, Tilden mumbled, walking back to his desk. Do you know, Sergeant, that some of the men think you're a spy? Who for? Said Vimes, reflecting that Snouted delivered more than cocoa. Lord Winder, I assume, said Tilden. Well, sir, we all work for him, but I don't report to anyone but you, if that's any help. Tilden looked up at him and shook his head sadly. Spy or not, Keel, I don't mind telling you that some of the orders we've been getting lately have not been thought out properly, in my opinion. What? He gave Vimes a glare, as if defying him to produce the red-hot thumbscrews there and then. Vimes could see how much the admission that abduction and torture and conspiracy to criminalize honest citizens might not be acceptable government policy was costing the old man. Tilden hadn't been brought up to think like that. He'd ridden off under the flag of Ankh-Morpork to fight the cheese-eaters of Quirm, or Johnny Clatchian, or whatever enemies had been selected by those higher up the chain of command, with never a second thought about the rightness of the cause, because that sort of thing could slow a soldier down. Tilden had grown up knowing that the people at the top were right. That was why they were at the top. He didn't have the mental vocabulary to think like a traitor, because only traitors thought like that. Haven't been here long enough to comment, sir, said Vimes. Don't know how you do things here. Not like we used to, mumbled Tilden. Just as you say, sir. Snouty says you know your way around remarkably well, Sergeant, for someone new to the city. There was a sentence with a hook at the end, but Tilden was an inexperienced angler. One nick is pretty much like any other, sir, said Vimes. And, of course, I visited the city before. Of course, said Tilden hurriedly. Well, thank you, Sergeant. If you could explain things to the men, I'd be grateful. Yes, sir, of course. Vimes shut the door carefully behind him and went down the steps 2 at a time. The squad below had barely moved. He clapped his hands like a schoolteacher. Come on, you've got patrols to get to. Get moving, not you, Sergeant Knock. A word in the yard, please. Vimes didn't bother to wait to see if the man would follow him. He went out into the late afternoon sunshine, leaning against the wall, and waited. 10 years ago, 10 years ago, if he was sober, he'd have taught Knock a few lessons about who's boss with several well-aimed punches. And that was certainly the custom these days. Scraps between watchmen hadn't been uncommon when Vimes was a constable, but that wouldn't do for Sergeant Keel. Knock stepped out, inflated with mad, terrified bravado. When Vimes raised his hand, the man actually flinched. Cigar, said Vimes. I don't drink, said Vimes. You can't beat a good cigar. I don't smoke, mumbled Knock. Look, about this inkstand. Do you know, he'd gone and put it in the safe of his, said Vimes, smiling. He had? And then forgotten about it, said Vimes. Happens to us all, Winsborough. A man's mind starts to wander. He's never quite certain of what he's done. Vimes maintained the friendly grin. It was as good as raining blows. Besides, he'd given Knock his correct name. The man never used it in public for fear of the panic it might cause. Just thought I'd put your mind at rest about it, said Vimes. Sergeant Winsborough Knock shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. He wasn't certain whether he'd got away with something or had just ended up deeper into something else. Tell me more about Lance Corporal Coates, said Vimes. Knock's face was, for a moment, an agony of calculation, and then he adopted his usual policy. When you think there's wolves on your trail, throw someone off the sleigh. Ned, sir, he said, hard worker, of course, does his job, but a bit tricky between you and me. Oh, and you don't have to call me sir, Winsborough, not out here. He reckons Jack's as good as his master, if you know what I mean. Reckons he's as good as anyone. Bit of a troublemaker in that respect. Barrackroom lawyer. That sort of thing, yes. Rebel sympathies. Knock turned his eyes up innocently. Could be, sir. Wouldn't like to see a lad in trouble, of course. You think I'm a spy for the unmentionables, thought Vimes, and you're throwing Coates to me. And the other day you were pushing him for promotion. You little worm. Worth keeping an eye on, then? He said aloud. Yes, sir. Interesting, said Vimes, always a worrying word to the uncertain. It certainly worried Knock, and Vimes thought, my God, perhaps Veterinary feels like this all the time. Some of us go round to the Broken Drum after shift's over, said Knock. It's open round the clock. I don't know if... I don't drink, said Vimes. Oh, yes, you said Knock. And now I'd better pick up young Sam and get out on patrol, said Vimes. Nice to have this little talk with you, Winsborough. He strode past, taking care not to look back. Sam was still waiting in the main office, but was sucked into his wake as he swept past. All right. Tanya, we'll see you tomorrow. You guys have a great day. Bye.